What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
I did not find out I was bad for the family's energy from a phone call or a face-to-face talk where someone at least pretends to be brave. I found out when my sister forwarded a screenshot from the reunion group chat where my cousin Tyler, who has never organized a thing in his life unless you count chaos as an event, typed a tidy sentence about how it might be better if I sat this year out because my energy had been heavy lately, which is a really nice way to say we want your help but not your presence. And as I read it the first time, I felt that familiar sting behind my eyes and the small drop in my stomach that feels like an elevator stopping between floors. And then I read it again and felt something I trust much more than hurt, which is clarity. The kind you get when someone finally says who they are out loud and you see the entire history rearrange itself into a picture that suddenly makes perfect sense. I sat with that picture for a while because I wanted to be sure I was not overreacting, and the longer I looked, the clearer it got, like one of those puzzles where the hidden image appears only after you step back, and there it was. All the times I said yes while he offered a joke and a shrug, all the times I moved money around so his projects did not collapse before the weekend, all the introductions I made that he pretended he found himself, all the little rescues that felt like small favors when they happened, but in the aggregate looked like the scaffolding holding up his life, and it was funny in a bitter, quiet way that I was suddenly the problem because I did not bring the right vibe. As if vibes could not read bank statements and contracts and names on accounts. I thought about calling him, I honestly did, because that would be the normal play. You call and it becomes a few minutes of fake apologies, and then a mutual decision to pretend this was a misunderstanding. But the more I imagined that call, the more I understood it would only produce a new sentence that meant nothing, something about love and family and how words came out wrong. And then nothing would change except I would have swallowed my pride and he would have learned that I will swallow it again. So I put my phone down and opened a notebook because I am old-fashioned when I am angry, and I wrote one plain list, not a journal, not a rant. Just a list that started with the bank where I had co-signed his business loan and moved through the storage unit that happens to be in my name because it was cheaper under my account. And then the supplier contact who takes my calls first because I paid her on time for years before Tyler ever met her. And finally, the quiet things like the auto payment I set up to stop his late fees from blowing up my credit. And as the ink dried, I felt the hurt shrink and the clarity take over the space it left. What got me was not the insult, it was the audacity to decide I was uninvited to a thing only because I would not smile through being used, and that is when the shape of my response landed in my chest, not a scream and not a scene. Just a decision to stop underwriting a person who confuses generosity with obligation, and if he wanted me out, I would deliver exactly that, not with doors slammed and plates thrown, but with signatures and silence and a schedule. I started with the one that mattered most because I believe in gravity, and the biggest object pulls everything else with it. So I pulled up the email folder from the bank where we signed the loan papers when his event rental idea needed just a little cosign. And I remembered how he promised to refinance after the first year and, like a fool who still believed that people keep promises if you love them enough, I kept waiting, and the bank had a tidy link for requesting removal as a guarantor. The kind of link you never click because you hope you will not need it, and yet there it was, simple and boring and powerful. Before I clicked anything, I sat a little longer and checked my reasons the way you check the stove before leaving the house, and they held up under inspection, because this was not punishment for a rude sentence. This was a correction of a long pattern where I carried weight while being treated like baggage, and there is a difference between being kind and being a doormat. And it turns out I am allergic to doormats that talk about energy as if that is a moral argument and not a convenient way to exclude the person who has started asking for boundaries. I called the bank first because I wanted a human to confirm the process, and the woman I reached had the voice of someone who has heard everything and is not shocked by much. And when I explained that I wanted to remove myself from a loan because circumstances had changed, she took a breath and told me in careful words that this kind of request triggers a full review, that my removal would require the borrower to stand on his own, that there would be new documents and possibly new rates if he could even meet them, and she asked me twice if I understood the consequence, and I said I understood very well, and when she offered to email the form I said please do. The form arrived. A few boxes, a date, a reason. Nothing dramatic, and it took me less than 5 minutes to fill, which felt almost insulting given how much of my life I had wrapped around that signature, and when I reached the line that asked why, I wrote the truest sentence I could without telling a family story to a stranger, that my risk tolerance had changed and I no longer wished to guarantee the obligation, and I reread every field because I am careful when I move pillars, and then I hovered over the submit button and thought about Tyler telling everyone I was bad for the family's energy, and I remembered that for years I have been the generator that kept his lights on. And I pressed submit and watched the confirmation screen appear like a quiet door closing. I did not text him. I did not warn him. I did not hint at anything in the group chat where people kept posting casserole photos and hotel updates as if words had not already told me exactly who I am to them. And I did not send a dramatic paragraph to my aunt because none of that would land the way this will, and when the email from the bank confirmed that a representative would reach out to the borrower within a business day, I set a reminder, closed the notebook, and let the stillness spread. Because sometimes the most honest revenge is to stop carrying someone who swears you are the weight, and if he wanted me gone, then I would give him the purest version of that, beginning with the one thing he cannot fake, his own signature without mine. The bank moved faster than I expected, which told me they saw the same picture I did, because before lunch the next business day I had a neat confirmation that my request was logged and that the borrower would be contacted for updated documentation. Which is banker language for we need to see if you can stand on your own 2 feet without your cousin's spine underneath you, and even though I did not see the call or hear the tone, I knew the minute it happened because my phone lit up with Tyler's name, then with his girlfriend's name, then with a number I did not recognize that I am pretty sure belongs to the guy he calls his operations manager, even though the guy mostly stands around and says bro a lot. And I watched the screen go dark again because I had already decided that there would be no free explanations this time, only consequences arriving in the order they were earned. When I say I did not pick up, I do not mean I was smug about it. I mean I sat there and thought about every time I had jumped to put out a fire because I was afraid that if I let one burn it would spread to me. And I realized that fear had trained me to be the family extinguisher while the arsonists called my energy heavy, and that is when a very calm thought landed, which was that grown men can talk to bankers the same way grown women do. And if he really believed I was a dark cloud, then he could go chase sunshine at the branch office without me. So I put the phone face down and opened the messages from the bank, and the language was dry, but the meaning was sharp. A full guarantor release review would be initiated, income verification required, collateral reassessment possible, loan term subject to change, and a line that made me smile because it was simple and fair. If the borrower is unable to qualify independently, the guarantor removal request will be declined. By late afternoon, the calls turned into texts and the texts turned into voice notes, which is his favorite move when he wants to sound urgent and reasonable at the same time, and I played none of them, not because I was afraid of what he might say, but because I already knew the script. There would be a soft apology that was really a pivot, something about stress and family and how people took his words the wrong way, and then the ask would arrive wrapped in concern for my credit. A suggestion that for the sake of both of us I keep things how they are until he finishes a busy season, which he always promises is just around the corner like some kind of calendar that only belongs to him. And I let those notes pile up untouched because the only calendar I was living by now was the review timeline the bank would follow without emotion. Around dinner time my aunt called, and I watched her name ring and fade, and then a text from her appeared with a quick sentence about how I should not make decisions while upset. Which made me laugh out loud because I have been making responsible decisions while other people were upset for most of my life, and it was wild to see that skill suddenly framed as a tantrum simply because I finally aimed it at the right target. And I typed nothing back because I had nothing to explain and no interest in teaching an adult that actions arrive with invoices. The second day brought a new email from the bank asking me to confirm, in writing, that I wished to discontinue any automatic payments tied to my account, and that was the moment I realized I had forgotten one thread in my list. The small auto draft I had set up a while back to cover any late fees so nothing spilled onto my credit report, and I felt a faint, embarrassed heat crawl up my neck because I had trained myself to preempt his mess like muscle memory. And I took a slow breath and wrote back that yes, I wanted all of that discontinued immediately, and then I logged into my bank and deleted the draft from my side as well, and the relief that followed was ridiculous in its size for such a small click. Like I had reached behind a bookshelf and unplugged a humming thing I had gotten used to without noticing how loud it was. By the afternoon, a mutual cousin slid into my messages with a long paragraph about how Tyler was under a lot of pressure, and how the reunion was supposed to be positive, and how maybe I could just hit pause on whatever I was doing because family is bigger than misunderstandings, and I read it twice and saw the pattern sitting there like a coffee ring on a table. The assumption that I am the pause button you hit so the man can keep playing, and I left it unanswered because sometimes silence is the only language people bother to translate. The banker called me back on the third day, calm as ever, and let me know that based on preliminary review the borrower would need to provide tax returns and current profit and loss statements, and that if those did not meet the ratios the bank required, alternatives could include a new guarantor or additional collateral, and I thanked her for the clarity and told her I would not be providing any additional support and would not be discussing new guarantors, and she paused just long enough to make me think she understood the subtext, then wished me a good day in that crisp way that only people in risk management can pull off, and I hung up feeling an odd mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the version of me who thought being dependable would earn respect, relief for the version of me who finally learned to stop lending out her backbone. That evening I finally opened one of Tyler's voice notes because curiosity is still human, and he sounded exactly as expected, suddenly soft, suddenly reflective, saying he did not mean to hurt me and that he was just trying to protect the vibe of the reunion because things have been tense and he wanted it to be easy for everyone. And I sat there and thought about how easy has always meant easy for him and expensive for me, and I let the note end without replaying it. Then I set my phone down and opened my notebook to the next line on my list, the one that has been sitting there for years like a secret favor dressed as storage, and I wrote one sentence that felt like picking up a key I should have never handed out. Tomorrow I will drive to the unit and close it, and he can discover what it feels like when the space he fills for free suddenly needs to be paid for like the rest of the world. I woke up before my alarm because the decision itself had more charge than sleep, and I did not waste it on overthinking or drafts of what I might say if someone challenged me in the parking lot. I just grabbed the file with the storage unit contract, the spare lock I keep for myself, and the small list I had written the night before so I would not start second-guessing when a manager asked me to confirm details, because I know how I get when people try to soften me with names like honey and sweetheart, and I wanted no daylight between what I planned and what I did, so I drove across town repeating the simplest truth I own, which is that access is a privilege and I do not owe it to anyone who calls me heavy while sitting on my shoulders. When I walked into the office, I used the same voice I use with customer service, when something needs to be fixed without drama, polite and steady and firm, and I put the contract on the counter and told the manager, a woman who has seen every variety of family circus come through her doors, that I was the account holder on Unit 137, and I wanted to terminate the agreement effective immediately. And before she could tell me about prorated credits or ask for a reason, I added that any codes associated with my account should be disabled as of that minute, that I would sign whatever she needed, and that I did not authorize anyone else to access the space. And I watched her eyebrows lift a millimeter as she scrolled through the notes and saw the name of my cousin listed as an authorized user, and she asked with professional caution whether I wanted that name removed. And I said I wanted the entire account closed and the lock replaced with mine until the contents could be cleared according to policy. She explained the rules in that careful cadence people use when they do not want to get in the middle of a fight, that if the unit was in my name then the decision was mine, that they would give written notice to the listed users, that there was a short window to clear belongings before fees or disposal procedures, and I nodded because I knew all of that already. I set it up originally and read every line like a lawyer even though I am not one, and I signed where she pointed and asked her to print the notices so I could take a copy, not because I plan to deliver anything by hand, but because I've learned that paper has a way of quieting the part of me that still wants to apologize for doing the right thing. And when she offered to escort me to the unit, I said yes, because I wanted a witness to the condition and to the fact that my lock would be the last one that counted today. The hallways smelled like cardboard and dust and something chemical that always hangs around places where people store their extra lives, and that is the only detail I will give you because everything else was a row of doors and fluorescent lights. Which is to say it was exactly what it needed to be and nothing more, and when we reached my unit I could feel the familiar heat of anger start to rise, not because of the stuff inside, but because of the story I had told myself for years about why keeping this in my name was harmless, about how it cost me almost nothing and saved him a lot and therefore made me a good person, as if goodness can be measured by how quietly you let someone take advantage, and I took a breath. Spun the dial on the lock I had put there months ago when he lost his key for the second time, and opened it for the last time as the person who took responsibility for what happened here. I did not catalog his inventory because that is not my job anymore. I took 3 photos for my records, locked the door with my own lock, and handed the manager the original key so she could log the change. And then I stood in the office while she sent the automated notice to the phone number and email on file, the ones that belonged to him, and it felt like watching something heavy slide into place. Not a slam, not a scene. Just the sound of a door clicking shut that should never have been open in the first place, and within minutes my phone started buzzing on the counter where I had set it face down, first with a call from Tyler. Then with a text that started with my name in all caps and the kind of punctuation people use when they want to make their panic my problem, and I did not touch it because nothing good ever started with my name shouted at me by someone who wants free rent. By lunchtime, my sister had forwarded me a screenshot of the cousins' chat where Tyler wrote that someone had messed with his storage and that the facility was making mistakes. And then another message where he said he needed to get in urgently because there were deliveries coming, and a third where he tagged me as if that would summon me like a concierge. And I stared at the screen long enough to feel the old muscle twitch, the one that wants to explain and soothe and play translator between reality and denial, and then I let the screen go dark and reminded myself that grown men who start businesses can read contracts, and if he never read this one, that is not a literacy problem, it is a character problem. By late afternoon, he had escalated to voice notes with a tone I know too well, that mix of fake warmth and implied threat where he says he wants to talk like adults, and then slides in a line about how this could get ugly. And buried in one of them was the thing he always leans on when he is cornered, the hint that my actions might hurt his ability to make payroll, which is his favorite way to outsource his responsibility onto my conscience. And I felt the old guilt flare and then go out because I remembered the banker's clean sentences and the manager's clean policy and my own clean list. And I let the voice note expire unopened while I emailed the manager to ask for written confirmation that all access codes tied to my account were disabled and that any attempt to enter would require my physical presence. And she replied within minutes that everything was locked down and noted. That night I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and made myself sit through the urge to check it every 5 minutes because the compulsion is its own habit, and when I finally looked the next morning, the stack of messages from Tyler, from his girlfriend, from my aunt, and from a number that looked like his supplier was tall enough to scroll, and I opened none of them. I left them on read in the most literal way by reading nothing at all, and I wrote one line in my notebook to anchor myself in what comes next. Tomorrow I will call the supplier I introduced him to and remove my name from those orders, which will not break anything for her because she is competent, but it will make one thing very clear to him, that the doors he walked through were never his. They were mine, and I am done lending out the keys. I started the morning with coffee and a list, because I have learned that when emotions are loud, lists keep the steering wheel steady, and at the top of the page I wrote the supplier's name. The one I had introduced to Tyler back when he thought purchase orders were a suggestion and invoices were something you could charm into disappearing, and I dialed her direct line with the kind of calm you earn after years of being the reliable person. And I told her plainly that my name should be removed from any standing orders tied to his account, that I would not be responsible for confirming delivery windows, and that if she ever needed me she could always call, but that as of today my phone number was not a backdoor for his delays. And the relief in her voice was polite but unmistakable, because she has been in the middle of our family circus long enough to know a clean boundary when she sees one, and she thanked me for the heads up and said she would mark the account accordingly and require prepayment going forward, which felt like the business version of finally locking a gate that should have been locked the entire time. Within an hour, the predictable wave hit. A string of texts from Tyler that moved like a weather system from confident sunshine to scattered showers to full storm, with the first note insisting there had been a misunderstanding at the bank. Then a second one asking me to call him so he could explain. Then a third switching to that condescending tone where he implied I might not understand the financial implications of my decisions, and I sat there and watched the old script try to boot up. The one where I apologize for making rational choices and he gets the satisfaction of deciding whether to forgive me, and I left every single message blue and unopened because I had already explained everything to the only people who needed to hear it. The banker, the storage manager, and the supplier, and none of those conversations required me to defend my character. They just required decisions and signatures, which is how adults handle consequences when they do not have an audience. The group chat did what group chats always do when someone refuses to play their assigned role. It turned into a courtroom where no one wants to say the thing out loud. So they ask leading questions and post vague quotes about family and forgiveness, as if the person who is tired of being used is the one who needs spiritual guidance, and my sister, who has finally learned to stop mediating for people who would not cross the street for her, sent me private screenshots of Tyler's girlfriend, complaining that some people thrive on chaos, which made me laugh because I could not think of anything more orderly than a bank review and a terminated rental agreement and a supplier policy change, and I told my sister I was fine and that I did not need allies. I just needed silence to do its work. Silence is not passive when you have been the person who always responds. Silence is a statement that says I am done negotiating against myself, and I held that line all day while my phone buzzed with a rhythm that used to make me jump. And somewhere in the early afternoon, a cousin who has never once paid for his own drinks at a reunion tried to guilt me by saying people were worried about me, which translated into people are worried about the convenience you provide, and I typed and deleted a dozen versions of the sentence I wanted to send before remembering that the most efficient reply was none at all, because when you stop feeding a story, it finally has to sit with its own hunger. Around dinner time, the first sideways threat arrived in the form of a voice note from Tyler that opened with a sigh and a line about how he had talked to a lawyer friend and that this might not be as straightforward as I thought, and I recognized the tactic instantly. The hint of legal smoke meant to push me back into a panic where I would beg to make it easy again, and I let the note finish without pressing replay. Then I opened my email and organized every confirmation I had received into a folder so that if anyone wanted to test my resolve, I could forward it all without commentary, because nothing makes bullies shrink like timestamps and policies, and the words per my previous message, and that small ritual soothed me more than any soothing could have, because it reminded me that while he throws feelings, I stack facts. The fallout began to reach people who do not care about energy or vibes or reunions, which is to say people whose money depends on reliability. And one of Tyler's weekend crew texted me with a soft question about whether he should be worried about jobs being canceled, and I felt that old tug, the one that makes you want to rescue by over-explaining, but I pushed it away and told him, as kindly as I could, that I did not manage Tyler's business, and that he should ask his employer, and it felt both cruel and clean, because it forced the responsibility back to where it belongs, and I knew, in that steady way you know a forecast you can trust, that this is the moment when people see the difference between reputation you talk about and reputation you build by showing up on time with invoices clearly paid. By late evening, the chatter slowed, the outrage burned itself down to embers, and that is when the calls from my aunt began, the first two going to voicemail, the third accompanied by a text that tried to braid guilt and sweetness, with a line about family sticking together and another about how Tyler is just under so much pressure, followed by the request that we speak because she just wants to clear the air, and I sat with that for a long minute, thinking about how the air is already clear. It just is not convenient for her side of the family to breathe it, and I let the phone ring a fourth time while I made dinner and stacked dishes and breathed in the quiet, and when it rang a fifth time I answered, not because I owed anyone a conversation, but because I wanted to hear which story she would choose now that the easy ones had dissolved, and when her voice came through small and careful and already leaning toward apology, I said her name once and waited, and she said, barely above a whisper, that we needed to talk, which is the sentence people use when they finally realize silence is not a phase, it is the new rule. When I finally picked up my aunt's call, I did it the way you open a door you used to love and now only tolerate, slowly and with a hand still on the handle. And the first thing she said was my name in that trembly voice she saves for funerals and overdue apologies, followed by a careful sentence about how Tyler did not mean it the way it sounded, and how the reunion planning had been stressful, and how everyone just wanted things to be peaceful, and I let her talk, because I have learned that people often need to hear their version out loud before they can notice how thin it is, and when she paused to see if I would throw her a rope, I said that I hoped they had a wonderful time, that I would not be there, and that I had already corrected something that should have been corrected a long time ago, which is my habit of paying for other people's calm with my credit and my silence. And the quiet on the line stretched long enough for me to hear her realize that this was not a negotiation, but an update. She tried the softer route first, the one about family stories and second chances, and how people say clumsy things when they are under pressure, and then, when that did not land, she reached for logistics, asking whether there was any way to, in her words, slow down the bank situation while Tyler got his documents together, and I told her in the same calm voice I used with the banker that the review was already in motion and that I was not revisiting it, that the storage unit was closed and locked under policy, that the supplier had been informed to treat his orders like any other customer's orders, and that if there were financial gaps, those were his to solve because he is a grown man running a business, not a teenager with a science project. And I could feel, through the tiny clicks on the line, the moment she realized I was no longer seating myself at their table and asking how I could help, I was standing in my own kitchen telling her, kindly but clearly, that the menu had changed. She asked what it would take to make this right, and that question did not come from curiosity, it came from strategy, and I answered it anyway because I wanted the record to be clean. I said it would take Tyler owning his words in the same place he broadcast them, not a side text, not a voice note to me alone, but a message to the cousins chat stating plainly that he called me bad for the family's energy while relying on me for things he did not respect, that I was not attending because I chose not to subsidize contempt, and that going forward no one should use my name for favors or references, and I added that, even if he sent that message, I would not be returning to the loan or the unit or the supplier list. Because forgiveness and access are not the same thing, and I was done confusing them, and she breathed in like I had slapped her, even though all I had done was draw a line around my own property and my own name. She tried one last angle, the one people use when they think you can still be managed, asking whether I was punishing the whole family for one person's mistake, and I told her no, that is the point. I was refusing to keep punishing myself for one person's choices, that I would not be canceling venues or exposing anybody to embarrassment or posting screens like a teenager starting a war. I was simply taking my hands off things that should never have rested on my hands, and if the ripple felt uncomfortable, then maybe it would teach everyone not to build their comfort on top of one person's uncredited labor. And when she asked if she could at least tell Tyler I was open to talking, I said she could tell him the truth, which is that I am listening. Just not to him, I am listening to myself. When we hung up, I wrote a short, factual message to the big chat because sometimes the cleanest cut is made with a straight line, and I said that I hoped the reunion was lovely and that I would not be attending, that no one should list me as a guarantor, reference, or emergency contact for Tyler or his business, that any deliveries or invoices tied to my name would be refused and returned, that my access to the storage had been terminated by me under policy, and that future communications about his operations should go to him directly, and then I pressed send and archived the thread, Not to make a scene, but to stop giving my attention to a room where people evaluate my worth based on how quietly I carry their weight. The next days moved the way consequences always move once the fuel is removed, first with a spark of panic and then with the slow caving of structures that were propped up by habit, and I did not watch closely because I did not need to. The evidence arrived without me opening anything, a terse email from the bank confirming receipt of the borrower's incomplete materials, a respectful note from the supplier thanking me for the clarity and confirming prepayment going forward, a message from the storage manager documenting that the notices had been sent and that any remaining contents would be handled per contract, and a final string of missed calls that dwindled as people realized the door was actually closed and not just lightly shut for dramatic effect. And when my aunt texted again, this time without scripts, just a plain apology for siding with him, I believed her because it did not include a request. I have not spoken to Tyler, and I do not plan to, not because I want him to suffer, but because my silence is the most accurate mirror I can offer, a reflection of the effort he put into our relationship once the favors stopped. And maybe one day he will send that message to the family without being prompted. Maybe one day he will refinance without anyone else's spine. Maybe he will learn how to carry his own name without borrowing mine, and maybe not, and either way the win is the same. That I ended the story in a way that does not ask for permission or applause, just respect for the boundaries I should have drawn years ago. And while there is always a small ache when you stop being who a family trained you to be, there is something steadier underneath it that feels like finally setting down a box you pretended was light and walking away without explaining the physics to anyone, because the lesson was never about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about making sure the next time someone says my energy is heavy, they know it is because I am no longer holding up their house.